Hi everyone, Miss Aselson here. We're going to be working on Unit 3 LT3 notes, basic factoring with the reverse box method. So before we start, I just want to remind you, so when we did the box method, we had two factors such as x plus 3, and we were multiplying that by x plus 5. And remember when we did that, we made this box. And on the top, we had x and our 3 and x and our 5. And if you remember right, we multiplied those together to figure out what was inside the box. So if we're looking at this first box, we're going to use that x times that x. And x times x is x squared. And then we're going to move to this box right here, and we're going to take the 3 and the x. So 3 times x gives me a 3x. And then you come down to the bottom, and I'm going to take 5 times x, which gives me a 5x. And finally, the last one in the corner, which we're going to take our two corners, 3 times 5, and I get 15. Okay, so we took the outsides to get the insides. Well, today we're going to have everything on the inside, and we're going to try and figure out how we get this and how we get that. That's using the reverse box method to factor. So the steps for that is to set up the x, which that's what we did in our previous lessons. We're going to fill in the inside of the box, and then we're going to pull out our greatest common factors and then write them on the side and write them out. Okay, so let's start with number 1. The first step is to set up and solve our x. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Here's my x. Remember, to get that top number, we're going to take our a times our c, and that number is going to go right there. So a times c, 2 times 3 is 6. So I'm going to put a 6 on top. And then our b, whoops, that's not a highlighter. Our b is going to go on the bottom. So that 7 is going to go right here on the bottom. And then we find all our factors of 6 to figure out what will equal into 7. So I'll put my 6 on the side here, and I know 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. And the only way I can make 7 is that 1 times 6. I'm going to take 1 times 6. Okay, so now that we have that, now we're going to fill in our box. So now I'm going to create a box, just like we did when we created the box before. So this one needs 4 in it. Okay, and then we're going to fill in this first 2x squared is going to go right here, 2x squared. So I'm just going to write 2x squared in there. And then that middle piece, that b, we're going to fill in the b in this box and this box. But instead of taking the b in the middle, now we're going to take these. That 1x and that 6x is going to make that 7. So I'm going to fill in the 1 and I put an x on it, and a 6 and I put an x on it. And then our last one we're going to fill in is the 3, or our c, and that's going to go right here. So I'm going to put our 3 right here. Okay, so now we're going to try and find our outsides. We have to find the greatest common factor that are going to fill in the outsides that work for this box. Okay, so I'm trying to find a different, do I have more colors? No. All right, so what I'm going to do is use these ones right here. Okay, so when I'm looking at those, 2x squared and 1x, what do they both have in common? Well, I know they both have a 1. If I look at the number, they both have a 1, and they also both have an x in it. Okay, so now let's move over and let's look at these two. Okay, so I'm thinking of a 6 and a 3. What do 6 and 3 have in common? Well, I know they both have a 3, The 6 is the only one that has an x, and the 3 doesn't have an x, so I'm not going to write that x on top because they both don't have an x in common. And now I'm going to go across this way. Okay, so what do 2 and 6 both have in common? Well, I know they both have a 2, and the 2 has an x by it, and the 6 also has an x by it, so I know they both have an x in them. And then finally, I'm going to see what these two have in common. What do 1 and 3 have in common? Well, they have a 1. I see that the 1 has an x, but the 3 doesn't, so I'm not going to write an x next to it. So what I have in top is going to be my new factor. So my top says 1x, and because that's not a -3, I'm going to say +3 and put that in parentheses. And then what's going down the side is going to be my other one. So 2x plus 1. And that's going to be your final answer. So let's look at number 2. The first thing is we're going to set up and solve our x. Okay, so to get our top number, we're going to multiply our a times our c. So 3 times 5. I'm going to put that 15 on the top. And then our b goes on the bottom. So 16 goes on the bottom. I find my factors of 15, and I know 1 and 15. There's no 2, 3 and 5, and that's it. Well, the only thing that's going to add up to 16 are that 1 and that 15. And those together add up to 16. So now I'm going to create my box. Okay, and now I'm going to start with this 3x squared, and that's going to go right here. Okay, now I'm going to replace my b term. I'm going to replace this 16 with these two right here, and that's going to go in this box and this box. And I'm going to put an x with them. So this one I'm going to have 1x, and this one I'm going to have 15x. And finally, this 5 is going to go right here. So I'm going to put a 5 right there. Okay, and now I have to figure out what's in common. So when I'm looking at these ones right here, what's in common with those ones? Well, I have a 3x and a 3x squared and a 1x. Well, I know they both have a 1 in them. Whoops, I'm going to make that black. I know they both have a 1, and they know they also have an x in them. And now I'm going to go straight across from that. And let's see about these two. What do 15x and 5 have in common? Well, I know they both have a 5 in them, so I'm going to put a 5 on top. Now let's try going across. Okay, so I have a 3x and I have a 5x. Well, I know 3 and 5. Oh, I'm sorry, it's a 15. I can't see that. So this one's actually a 15. So 3x and 15x. Well, I know 3 will go into 15, so I know they both have a 3 in them. So I'm going to start with a 3, but I also see the 3x has a squared in it, and 15 also has an x, so I know they both have an x in them. And then finally, I'm going to end with these ones right here, 1x and 5. What do 1x and 5 have in common? Well, they both have a 1 in them, but they don't both have an x. I'm going to leave that as 1. So I'm going to take what I have on the top, 1x, and because it's not a -5, I'm going to say plus 5. And I'm going to multiply that by what's on the bottom, 3x plus 1. And then you're done. Okay, so let's continue on and do that with number 3. First, I'm going to set up and solve my x. So here's my x. There's no number in front of this, so I know it's a 1. So 7 times 1 is 7. And then my 8 goes on the bottom. Okay, and I think of all my multiples of 7, or my factors of 7. Well, I know 7 only has 1 and 7, so this one has to be a 1, and this one has to be a 7. So now that I have that, I can do my box. and fill in. I'm going to start with my A term, and my A term is going to go in the first one. So my A is, and you can just write x squared or you can write 1x squared. So I have 1x squared there. My B term, remember B, we're going to replace this B with this and this. And we're getting those from this number and this number. So I'm going to say 1 and make sure to put an X on it and 7x on it. Okay, and then I get my third one from my C value. So this is just going to be a 7. Okay, now I have to figure out what's in common. Okay, so what's the greatest common factor? What will go into both of them? So I'm going to start here. Okay, so I have a 1x squared and a 1x. Well, I know 1x squared and 1x, they both have a 1x in them. Okay, let's keep moving over. Now I want to do these two. What do 7x and 7 have in them? Well, they both have a 7, so that's going to go on top. Next, I want these ones. So 1x squared and 7x. So 1 and 7 only have a 1 in common, and they also have just an x in common. And then finally, we're going to do these two. And 1 and 7 just has a 1 in common. And now we take what we have on the top and what we have on the side and we put them into factors. So 1x plus 7 and then 1x plus 1. Okay, let's do the same thing with number 4. Start with your x and set it up. Again, there's no number in front, so I know it's a 1. So I take my A times my C. 6 times 1 is 6. And my 5 goes down here. Okay, thinking of my factors of 6. I know 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Well, the only thing to make 5 would be that 2 and that 3. So I'm going to put my 2 here, my 3 here. Make my box. Remember, I start with my A value, and that's going to go right here. So I'm going to write 1x squared. And move on to my B value, which is my 5. And I'm going to replace that 5 with a 2 and a 3. And those are going right here and right here. Oops. 2x and 3x. And then finally I'm going to put my C value in, which is my 6, and that's going right here. Okay, now I'm seeing what's in common. Top and bottom, 1x squared and 2x. Well, I know they both have a 1x in them. 3 and 6, if I move over 1. So I'm here. 3 and 6 both have a 3 in them. I'm going to keep moving along. Now I'm here, 1x and 3x. The greatest common factor between those would just be a 1 and an x. And on the bottom, oops, I have a 2x and a 6. There's only a 2 in common with those ones. So my factors are going to be 1x plus 3 and 1x plus 2. All right, let's move on to number 5. We're going to do the same thing. Start by setting up your x. A times c. 6 times negative 2 is going to give me a negative 6. And remember that when you're in your b, if there's no number in front of that negative x, the number that's in front of it is really a 1. So it's really a negative 1. So down below, I'm going to put a negative 1 in here. Okay, my factors of 6. I know 1 and 6, and I know 2 and 3. Even though that's a -6, we can make either side of those a negative to make that -6. So I always start with a +6 first, and then I work with my negatives in later. A little hint to tell you. So if this one is negative, that means that the bigger number is going to have to be the negative one. Okay, so if the number on the bottom, your B term, is negative, that means your bigger factor has to be the negative. Okay, so this one's going to be negative, or this one is going to be negative. Okay, so the only ones I can make, so if I had 1 minus 6, that would give me a -5, and I need a -1. So I want these two right here, 2 and a -3. Once I have that all filled in, I'm going to set up my box. Okay, and I'm going to start with my A value. And that A value is going to come first, and it's going to go right here. So I'm going to put 3x squared in there. Okay, then I have my B value, which is that -1x, and I'm going to replace that with these two and just stick x's on them. So I have 2x and then a -3x. And then lastly, I put my C value on, which is right here. So I'm going to put my -2 there. Okay, now I have to figure out what's in common. When I look at 3x squared and 2x, the only thing that's in common between the 3 and the 2 is a 1, but they also have an x. Okay, moving to the right, I have a -3 and a -2. Because they're both negative, I know right away I'm going to have a negative up there. And then 3 and 2 both have in common just a 1. So that one's going to be a -1. Okay, and then moving, so we're on the left side, 3x squared and -3x. Those both have a 3 in them, and it's not going to be negative. It's going to be a +3 because I only have one negative. So if there's only one negative, it's going to be positive. If they're both negative, it would be negative. And then I also see that they both have x's on them. Okay, and then moving down, 2x and -2, they both have a 2 in common. And now that we have those, 1x minus 1, and then going down, 3x plus 2. And you can flip those two around. I could say 3x plus 2, and then 1x minus 1. It doesn't matter what order they go in as long as you chunk them together. Okay, number 6, we're going to set up and solve our x. So 2 times -5 is going to give me -10, and my 9 goes on the bottom. When I think of the multiples of, or the factors of 10, 1 and 10, 2 and 5. Okay, and I need a +9, but a -10. So let's just write those down. So I'm going to put 10 here, and I have a 1 and a 10, a 2 and a 5. Okay, we know we need the top to be negative, so one of our numbers on the bottom has to be negative. If this number right here is positive, then the bigger number is going to be positive. If that number is negative, the bigger number is going to be negative. Okay, so it's going to be, that's going to be positive, which means one of these other numbers is going to be negative. Okay, so -1 plus 10, and you can throw that in your calculator if you're not sure what that is. -1 plus 10, that's going to give you that +9. So I'm going to say -1, whoops, -1 and 10. I'm going to set up my box. Okay, I'm going to start with my 2x squared in that first one. So 2x squared. Now I'm replacing that 9x with what I just found, and I found a -1x and a 10x. Okay, and finally I'm going to put my C value at the bottom. My C value is -5. So I'm thinking 2x squared and -1x. What number do they both have in common? They both have a 1, and I see they both have an x on them. Now I'm looking at 10x and negative 5x. Well, I know 5 will go into them, and they both don't have x's and they're both not negative, so that one's just going to be a 5. Okay, moving to the left side, 2x squared and 10x. I know that they both have a 2 in them, and they also both have an x in them. Okay, and then moving on the bottom left, I have a negative 1x and a negative 5x. Because they're both negative, I know that they have a negative in common, and now I just have to figure out what number. Well, they both have a negative 1 in common. Once I have those, I can just write out my factors. So now I have 1x, and it's going to say plus 5, and then 2x minus 1, because that one was a negative 1. And that's going to be your answer for number 6. Okay, we're going to continue doing the same thing. We're going to set up and solve our x. So 15 is going to times 1 is 15, and my 8 goes on the bottom because that's my b. I'm thinking of what are the multiples, or not multiples, I keep saying that. What are the factors of 15? I know 1 and 15, and I also know 3 and 5. Well, 3 and 5 equals 8, so I'm going to put a 3 here and a 5 here. I'm going to set up my x, or not my x, my box. And in the first box goes my a value, so x squared. Okay, now I'm going to replace my b value with what I just found. So this b, this 8, is being replaced with these two, and they're going here and here. Remember, they have to have x's on them, not just the letter, but you need an x too. So I'm going to say 3x and 5x. And then my c value, my 15, is going to go in the last spot that I have. So that's just going to be a 15. Okay, so now I have to look. What is the greatest common factor between those? So if I have x squared and 3x, well, I see they both just have an x in them. So my x is going to go on top. When I have a 5x and 15, I know they both have a 5. And then we're moving to the left side. X squared and 5x, well, those ones both have an x in them. And then 3x and 15, well, 3 goes into 15, so I'm going to say that 3 works right there. Then I'm just going to write those out. X plus 5 and x plus 3. Okay, last one, and then you're ready for homework. You're going to set up your box. Not your box, your x. Set up your x. Okay, you're going to multiply your a times your c, so negative 10 times 1 gives me a negative 10. And my b is going to go on the bottom, so that 3 goes on the bottom. And now I have to think. So let's write this one out because it's a negative number. So we have a negative and a positive. So I'm going to say 10. So I know 1 and 10. I know 2 and 5, and that's it. Okay, so let's use that hint I showed you. So this 3 is positive. So that means if that's positive, this one has to be positive, okay? Which makes the other ones negative. Okay, so I'm going to say negative 1 plus 10. That's going to give me a 9. But a negative 2 plus 5 will give me a positive 3. So we want to use that negative 2 and that 5. So I'm going to say negative 2 right here and a 5 right there. Okay, now I'm going to draw my box. Okay, my a value is going to go in that first box. So this a value is going to go right here. So I'm going to say x squared. And then remember my b values I'm replacing. So here's my b value, and I'm going to replace it with those two. And they're going right here and right here. So I have negative 2 and stick an x on it, and then 5x. And then my c value, that 10, and it's a negative 10, that c value is going to go on the bottom. Okay, now I have to just figure out what's in common. X squared and 2x, or negative 2x, they both have an x in common. 5 and negative 10, they both have a 5 in common. I see 5 has an x, but 10 doesn't, so it's just going to be that 5. X squared and 5x, they both have an x. And then I have a negative 2x and a negative 10. Again, I have a negative and a negative, so they have a negative in common. And then 2 and 10, they also have a 2 in common. The 2 is the only thing with the x on it, so I'm going to stop there. So now I'm going to write x plus 5 and x minus 2. That's going to be your final answer for that one. Stop and let us know if you have questions.